thanks to the board of the Fair Winds Foundation. I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you. And for those of you in the audience who can't see her, there's a woman a few rows back with a little sign that she'll hold up that says 5 minutes left. And I'm going to disappoint her too, because I don't think I have 20 minutes to add to what Ted has just said. When I was in government, I would come to events like this, and my staff would push into my hands a stack of papers with very clear positions where I had to make sure I said everything that was on there and didn't say anything that wasn't on there. And I got very good at that. That's the good news. The bad news is I have to do it myself, but fortunately for you all, I will be much shorter for it. I was tempted when you invited me to come up here and speak on U.S. grand strategy towards China to give the same answer that Prime Minister Nehru of India gave when he was asked his view on Western civilization, and his response was that he thought it would be a good idea. Sometimes, as Ted, you said, the U.S. political discussions and the domestic arguments in our own political system overtake, the broader view that the United States has, even on foreign policy issues. That is probably less the case with China than on other issues, and in fact, there's probably, to the extent there is consensus on anything in Washington right now, the general assessment of the challenge China faces is probably one of those rare places that there is consensus. I thought I'd give a little bit of context to what Ted, you talked about, the views on China and the background, the historical background of the U.S.-China relationship. I've been coming and going to China for the past 30 years. I was an American diplomat for 30 years. And starting in 1990, in other words, a year after the Tiananmen massacre, I arrived in China for my first assignment, and I left shortly after the start of the Trump administration in 2017. And over that time, we saw a lot of ups and a lot of downs in the relationship. The United States was instrumental in admitting China into the World Trade Organization. We saw lots and lots of cooperation across a range of international issues, but we also had some real crises in the relationship, including I happened to be in Beijing when we accidentally blew up the Chinese embassy in Yugoslavia. I was there when a Chinese pilot accidentally knocked down an American plane over the South China Sea. And so we've been through very difficult moments in the past. What's different now, I think, is that there is less, and Ted, you got into it, there's less binding the relationship together. So if we were to have another one of those incidents that we had in the early 2000s, I think it would be a much more serious crisis than we faced then. And a little more context, again, I was the senior career diplomat in our embassy at the end of the Obama administration, which I think is really the high point of U.S. efforts to engage China, to influence Chinese behavior, and to integrate what we said then was to integrate China into the rules-based order. And perspective I take to that effort, and ultimately I think Barack Obama left office frustrated with those efforts. I spent 5 years during the Obama administration working in Afghanistan and then back in Washington on Afghan policy. The United States invested 20 years, probably $1 trillion, lost more than 2,000 servicemen in Afghanistan fighting. And at the end of that time, at the end of having invested the time and resources and blood, our impact on the direction of that country was fairly limited. And I like to use that and think about how much less influence we have over the People's Republic of China. And to put in context the effort to shape Chinese behavior. Not that China doesn't respond to outside stimuli, to outside pressure, but it's just much, much harder. And so I think there's consensus now in Washington that a China strategy, China is the end of a China strategy rather than the beginning of a China strategy. Because the country over which we have the most influence is the United States, and so that's where our strategy has to start, with investing in economically in areas that make the United States more competitive, reinforcing our democratic structure and systems, building up a labor force that has been really badly hit by deindustrialization. Not entirely, but at least in a significant part because of competition, in many cases, competition supported by large non-market support from the Chinese government has really damaged the U.S. industrial economy. So that's the first part of the U.S. strategy. The second part of the U.S. approach to China is to look not to China but to our allies in the region and globally, and reinforce and restore those relationships, not as an effort to contain China, but to strengthen the will, the resolve, and the confidence that free market democracies around the world have. And then and only then do we, having shored up our position at home and with our allies and partners, do we engage with China in the recognition that there are some things that we can't change. And I think increasingly you'll see the United States saying, while we may not be able to, decades now of say, trade negotiations have failed to limit the non-market practices by the Chinese. And we may just have to accept that, but that does not mean we have to accept products produced by non-market practices into the U.S. market, or products of forced labor. We don't have to admit those into the U.S. market. So I think increasingly it will be not confrontational, but just a recognition of the fact that China and the United States and a lot of U.S. partners are moving in a different direction, and probably in the best interests of both sides to recognize that, and not decouple, but to where we cannot see eye to eye, to move in different directions. Ted, you talked a lot about Taiwan, and Mr. Premier, I know we'll talk about Taiwan issues in our question and answer period. So I don't want to get too deeply into that, other than, as Ted, you noted, Xi Jinping, when he wakes up, has a lot of things on his to-do list. I think our goal as the United States and Taiwan is, to the extent possible, keep Taiwan off of Xi Jinping's to-do list, and let him deal with the many, many other headaches he has. So I think I have disappointed your assistant and her 5-minute sign, but I will turn it back to you, Mr. Premier. Thank you.
All right.